Hi, it's Grandma here, and I'm reading Call of the Wild, and this will be my final reading for this book by Jack London. Previously in this chapter, this is part 3 of chapter 7, The Sounding of the Call. Buck has proven that he can survive without humans. He has brought down a moose. It has taken him days to do it, and the moose was old, and the moose had an arrow in it already. So it was struggling a little bit, but it still took days because at first Buck had to fend off the other people that were traveling with the moose, the cows and the calves and the other bucks that were traveling with him. Not our buck, I mean a male moose. Anyway, as he held on, he became more and more conscious of the new stir in the land. There was life abroad in it different from life which had been there throughout the summer. No longer was this fact borne in upon him in some subtle, mysterious way. The birds talked of it, the squirrels chattered about it, the very breeze whispered of it. Several times he stopped and drew in the fresh morning air in great sniffs, reading a message which made him leap on with greater speed. He was oppressed with a sense of calamity happening, if it were not calamity already happened. As he crossed the last watershed and dropped down into the valley toward camp, he proceeded with great caution. 3 miles away, he came upon a fresh trail that sent his neck hairs rippling and bristling. It led straight toward camp and John Thornton. Buck hurried on swiftly and stealthily, every nerve straining and tense, alert to the multitudinous, I don't even know what that word is, details which told the story, all but the end. His nose gave him a varying description of the passage of the life on the heels of which he was traveling. He remarked the pregnant silence of the forest. The bird life had flitted. The squirrels were in hiding. One only he saw, a sleek gray fellow flattened against a gray dead limb so that he seemed a part of it, a woody excrescence upon the wood itself. As Buck slid along with the obscureness of a gliding shadow, his nose was jerked suddenly to the side, as though a positive force had gripped and pulled it. He followed the new scent into a thicket and found Nig. He was lying on his side, dead, where he had dragged himself, an arrow protruding, head and feathers from either side of the body. 100 yards further on, Buck came upon one of the sled dogs Thornton had bought in Dawson. This dog was thrashing about in a death struggle directly on the trail, and Buck passed around him without stopping. From the camp came the faint sound of many voices, rising and falling in a sing-song chant. Bellying forward to the edge of the clearing, he found Hans, lying on his face, feathered with arrows like a porcupine. At the same instant, Buck peered out where the Spruce Bough Lodge had been and saw what made his hair leap straight up on his neck and shoulders. A gust of overpowering rage swept over him. He did not know that he growled, but he growled aloud with terrible ferocity. For the last time in his life, he allowed passion to usurp cunning and reason, and it was because of his great love for John Thornton that he lost his head. The Yeehats were dancing about the wreckage of the Spruce Bough Lodge when they heard a fearful roaring and saw rushing upon them an animal the like of which they had never seen before. It was Buck, a live hurricane of fury, hurling himself upon them in a frenzy to destroy. He sprang at the foremost man. It was the chief of the Yeehats, ripping the throat wide open till the rent jugular spouted a fountain of blood. He did not pause to worry the victim, but ripped in passing, with the next bound tearing wide the throat of a second man. There was no withstanding him. He plunged about in their very midst, tearing, rending, destroying, in constant and terrific motion which defied the arrows they discharged at him. In fact, so inconceivably rapid were his movements, and so closely were the Indians tangled together, that they shot one another with the arrows, and one young hunter, hurling a spear at buck in mid-air, drove it through the chest of another hunter with such force that the point broke through the skin of the back and stood out beyond. Then a panic seized the Yeehats, and they fled in terror to the woods, proclaiming as they fled the advent of the evil spirit. And truly, Buck was the fiend incarnate, raging at their heels and dragging them down like deer as they raced through the trees. It was a fateful day for the Yeehats. They scattered far and wide over the country, and it was not till a week later that the last of the survivors gathered together in a lower valley and counted their losses. As for Buck, wearying of the pursuit, he returned to the desolated camp. He found Pete, where he'd been killed in his blankets in the first moment of surprise. Thornton's desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth, and Buck scented every detail of it down to the edge of a deep pool. By the edge, head and 4 feet in the water, lay Skeet, faithful to the last. The pool itself, muddy and discolored from the sluice boxes, effectually hid what it contained, and it contained John Thornton. For Buck followed his trace into the water, from which no trace led away. All day, Buck brooded by the pool or roamed restlessly about the camp. Death as a cessation of movement, as a passing out and away from the lives of the living, he knew. And he knew John Thornton was dead. It left a great void in him, somewhat akin to hunger, but a void which ached, and which food could not fill. At times when he paused to contemplate the carcasses of the Yeehats, he forgot the pain of it. And at such times he was aware of a great pride in himself, a pride greater than any he had yet experienced. He had killed man, the noblest game of all. And he had killed in the face of the law of club and fang. He sniffed the bodies curiously. They had died so easily. It was harder to kill a husky dog than them. They were no match at all, were it not for their arrows and spears and clubs. Thenceforward he would be unafraid of them, except when they bore in their hands their arrows, spears, and clubs. Night came on, and a full moon rose high over the trees into the sky, lighting the land till it lay bathed in ghostly day. And with the coming of the night, brooding and mourning by the pool, Buck became alive to a stirring of the new life in the forest, other than that which the Yeehats had made. He stood up, listening and scenting. From far away drifted a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar sharp yelps. As the moments passed, the yelps grew closer and louder. Again, Buck knew them as things heard in that other world which persisted in his memory. He walked to the center of the open space and listened. It was the call, the many-noted call, sounding more luringly and compellingly than ever before. And as never before, he was ready to obey. John Thornton was dead. The last tie was broken. Man and the claims of man no longer bound him. Hunting their living meat as the Yeehats were hunting it on the flanks of the migrating moose, the wolf pack had at last crossed over from the land of streams and timber and invaded Buck's Valley. Into the clearing where the moonlight streamed, they poured in a silvery flood, and in the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue, waiting their coming. They were awed. So still and large he stood, and a moment's pause fell, till the boldest one leaped straight for him. Like a flash, Buck struck, breaking the neck. Then he stood, without movement, as before, the stricken wolf rolling in agony behind him. 3 others tried in sharp succession, and one after the other they drew back, streaming blood from slashed throats or shoulders. This was sufficient to fling the whole pack forward, pell-mell, crowded together, blocked and confused by its eagerness to pull down the prey. Buck's marvelous quickness and agility stood him in good stead. Pivoting on his hind legs and snapping and gashing, he was everywhere at once, presenting a front which was apparently unbroken. So swiftly did he whirl and guard from side to side. But to prevent them from getting behind him, he was forced back, down past the pool and into the creek bed, till he brought up against a high gravel bank. He worked along to a right angle in the bank, which the men had made in the course of mining, and in this angle he came to bay, protected on three sides, with nothing to do but to face the front. And so well did he face it that at the end of half an hour, the wolves drew back, discomfited. The tongues of all were out and lolling, the white fangs showing cruelly white in the moonlight. Some were lying down with heads raised and ears pricked forward. Others stood on their feet watching him, and still others were lapping water from the pool. One wolf, long and lean and gray, advanced cautiously, in a friendly manner, and Buck recognized the wild brother with whom he had run for a night and a day. He was whining softly, and as Buck whined, they touched noses. Then an old wolf, gaunt and battle-scarred, came forward. Buck writhed his lips into the preliminary of a snarl, but sniffed noses with him. Whereupon the old wolf sat down, pointed nose at the moon, and broke out the long wolf howl. The others sat down and howled, and now the call came to Buck in unmistakable accents. He too sat down and howled. This over, he came out of his angle, and the pack crowded around him, sniffing in half-friendly, half-savage manner. The leaders lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang away into the woods. The wolves swung in behind, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them, side by side with the wild brother, yelping as he ran. And here may well end the story of Buck. The years were not many when the Yeehats noted a change in the breed of timber wolves, for some were seen with splashes of brown on their head and muzzle, and with a rift of white centering down the chest. But more remarkable than this, the Yeehats tell of a ghost dog that runs at the head of the pack. They are afraid of this ghost dog, for it has cunning greater than they, stealing from their camps in fierce winters, robbing their traps, slaying their dogs, and defying their bravest hunters. Nay, the tale grows worse. Hunters there are who fail to return to the camp, and hunters there have been whom their tribesmen found with throats slashed cruelly open and with wolf prints about them in the snow, greater than the prints of any wolf. Each fall, when the Yeehats follow the movement of the moose, there is a certain valley which they never enter. And women there are who become sad when the word goes over the fire of how the evil spirit came to select that valley for an abiding place. In the summers, there is one visitor, however, to that valley, of which the Yeehats do not know. It is a great, gloriously coated wolf, like, and yet unlike all other wolves. He crosses alone from the smiling timberland and comes down into an open space among the trees. Here a yellow stream flows from rotted moosehide sacks and sinks into the ground with long grasses growing through it and vegetable mold overrunning it, hiding its yellow from the sun. And here he muses for a time, howling once, long and mournfully, ere he departs. But he's not always alone. When the long winter nights come on and the wolves follow their meat into the lower valleys, he may be seen running at the head of the pack through the pale moonlight or glimmering borealis, leaping gigantic above his fellows, his great throat a bellow as he sings a song of the younger world, which is the song of the pack. So that's the end of the book. Now, I want you to understand that the gold was, they described where the gold was. It was still in the moose sacks, but it was being overgrown by vegetation, and you could hardly see the gold. Also, I want you to be clear, that he has become a part of the pack, and he has offspring. He has children that show signs of being Buck's children. This is an excellent book, very difficult to read because of the vocabulary and the long sentences, but beautifully written. And I said this before in a previous reading, if you read it out loud, anytime you read, and anytime you have to read something that is very difficult to read, try reading it out loud. Sometimes if you pay attention to the commas and the periods, and you get a feel for what it is that is being said. But this is a very famous book, partially because of the beautiful writing and the descriptions, but also because it's not too often that a book has been written from a dog's point of view, from an animal's point of view, that isn't a fable or isn't an allegory of some kind. This is a story, and in no way does he talk as the animals in, say, Beatrice Potter talk, but we do know his feelings. And that makes it a very interesting book, to be able to know the feelings of a dog like this. It's also a commentary on life, on getting back to nature, listening to your inner voice, finding what it is that you're supposed to be doing in life. So there's a lot of other interesting parts of this book. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.